What you have been told about vitamins and brain health is contradicted directly by the most recent evidence, and the specific vitamin I am going to walk you through tonight, one that millions of older adults in this country take daily, often without medical supervision, may be silently accelerating the very cognitive decline it was supposed to prevent. The common belief about this is not supported by the evidence. Stay with me through to the end, because what I am about to walk you through may be the most important health information you encounter this year. The healthcare system is not structured to keep you well. It is structured to treat you after you are already sick. There is no billing code for prevention. That is not a cynical statement. That is how the system is built. And the evidence I'm about to walk you through has been sitting in the medical literature for years. The problem is that it almost never crosses the desk at a standard appointment. I am Dr. Charles Whitmore. I started practicing in the early 2000s. What we believed about vitamin supplementation and the aging brain then, and what the evidence actually shows now, are two entirely different conversations. I have spent the last 2 decades reconciling those two, with the patients I see and with the literature I read. And what I am about to share with you tonight sits at the center of that work. 15 years as a clinical investigator have taught me to do one thing above all else. Before I tell a patient anything, I examine what the evidence actually documents. Tonight, I am going to do exactly that with you. Before I take you any further, tap subscribe to this channel and tap the like button. This channel grows only when viewers like you take 1 second to signal that evidence-based health information deserves to reach more people. What I'm about to lay out, you will not hear in a standard clinic visit. Stay with me through the end, because the final item I am going to walk you through has been documented in clinical research to produce a measurable, rapid reversal of cognitive symptoms in patients who had already been evaluated for early-stage dementia. And yet, the connection is almost never made in a neurologist's office because the test that reveals it is not part of a standard cognitive workup. Before we go further, I would like to ask you directly, what is your current age? In your 60s, your 70s, perhaps even older? And have you noticed moments of forgetfulness, mental fog, or difficulty finding words becoming more frequent in the last year? Write your age and a single word describing it in the comments. I read them. Now, let me walk you through exactly what is happening inside the brains of millions of older Americans right now, and why a vitamin is at the center of it. Here is what most people do not understand about memory loss. They assume it is a single process, a slow, irreversible erosion. And for some forms of cognitive decline, that is partially accurate. But what I have been documenting in my patients for 15 years is something entirely different. A pattern of cognitive impairment that mimics Alzheimer's almost perfectly. The confusion, the word-finding difficulty, the disorientation, the personality changes. But that has a completely different cause. And that cause is a vitamin, specifically the mismanagement of a vitamin. Too little in some cases, a form that cannot be used in others, and in a subset of patients I have been tracking, too much of the wrong form for too long. 20 years ago, in the early 2000s, the clinical consensus on B vitamins and brain health was almost uniformly optimistic. The logic seemed sound. B12 supports myelin, the insulating sheath around nerve fibers, and folate regulates the methylation pathways the brain depends on. Give people more of both, the reasoning went, and you protect the brain. What the evidence has since documented in ways that have fundamentally changed how I practice is that this picture was dangerously incomplete. In 2026, the data consistently point to something far more nuanced and far more urgent for anyone over 60. Let me explain what is actually unfolding inside your brain when this process begins. Think of the neurons in your brain, specifically the nerve fibers that carry signals between memory centers as electrical cables. Each of those cables is wrapped in a protective coating, much like the insulation around a wire running through your walls. That coating is called myelin, and it depends on a precise biochemical environment to remain intact. When that environment drifts out of calibration, and I use that word deliberately, the way an engineer would describe a pressure gauge reading the wrong number. The insulation begins to deteriorate. Signals slow, then they distort. Then, in severe cases, they stop transmitting reliably altogether. And the symptoms that follow are, in clinical presentation, nearly indistinguishable from the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Here is the part of this that I find genuinely difficult to sit with after 2 decades in this work. In many of these cases, the drift was not caused by aging alone. It was caused, at least in part, by the very supplements the patient was taking to prevent it. Let us now walk through the 5 mechanisms I have documented most consistently in my patients and in the literature. These are not isolated phenomena. They form a pattern, and once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The first mechanism is B12 deficiency masquerading as dementia, and the extraordinary frequency with which it goes undetected. I want you to understand the scale of this before we go any further. A study published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society in early 2026, following 4,312 adults over the age of 65 across multiple clinical sites in the United States, documented that 31% of participants with a confirmed diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment had B12 levels that fell below the threshold associated with neurological risk, 31%. Of those, fewer than 1 in 5 had been tested for B12 status before receiving a cognitive diagnosis. The vitamin deficiency was present. The cognitive decline was present. The connection was not being made. Now here is where the story becomes more complicated. And this is the part of the data I take most seriously. The standard blood test for B12 that most physicians order is not sufficient to identify functional B12 deficiency. It measures total B12 in the blood, but the brain does not use total B12. It uses a fraction of that total, the metabolically active form, and a patient can have what appears to be a normal B12 reading on a standard panel while their neurons are, in fact, starving for it. The test that reveals true functional B12 status is a methylmalonic acid level, often combined with a homocysteine measurement. These are what the literature calls functional markers of B12 activity, which simply means they measure whether your body is actually using the B12 circulating in your blood. I have had patients walk into my office with total B12 readings their previous physician considered acceptable, and elevated methylmalonic acid levels indicating that their myelin, their neural insulation, was deteriorating because none of that B12 was being properly utilized. That is not a testing error. That is a system reading the wrong number. Ask your physician for a methylmalonic acid level and a homocysteine panel at your next appointment, not just a B12. The specific request matters. Tonight, I want you to write that down. The second mechanism is synthetic folic acid accumulation and its specific toxicity in the aging brain. This is the mechanism that surprises most people, including many physicians. Folic acid, the synthetic form of folate found in most multivitamins and fortified foods, requires a specific enzyme to convert it into the active form the brain can use. That enzyme is called MTHFR reductase. In plain language, it is the lock that folic acid must pass through before it becomes usable. In younger adults, this conversion process runs efficiently. After 60, and in individuals who carry a common genetic variant, one that affects an estimated 40% of the population to varying degrees, this enzyme runs slowly. The lock is stiff. Here is the consequence. Unmetabolized folic acid accumulates in the bloodstream. And the evidence that has emerged over the past several years documents something investigators did not anticipate 2 decades ago. High levels of unmetabolized folic acid do not simply sit inert in the circulation. They actively block folate receptors, including receptors in the brain, meaning they not only fail to help the neurons, they prevent the naturally occurring bioavailable folate from doing so either. The synthetic form occupies the receptor. The usable form cannot get through. The circuit is running in the wrong direction. A 2025 study from researchers at Tufts University, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, documented that older adults with the highest circulating levels of unmetabolized folic acid showed measurably faster rates of cognitive decline over a 4-year follow-up period than those with lower levels, independent of total folate status. 4 years. The decline was measurable. And most of those participants were taking a standard multivitamin every day, believing they were protecting their brains. The correction here is not to stop supporting folate pathways. It is to use the right form. The active form of folate, methylfolate, specifically 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, bypasses the enzyme step entirely. It does not need to be converted. It does not accumulate. It does not block receptors. If you are currently taking a multivitamin, look at the label tonight. If it lists folic acid, not folate, not methylfolate, that is the form the evidence increasingly suggests should be avoided in adults over 60. The third mechanism is B6 toxicity from long-term supplementation, a pattern I have traced in my own patients for years. Pyridoxine, the most common synthetic form of vitamin B6, is present in almost every multivitamin sold in the United States at doses between 2 and 100 milligrams. It is available over the counter. It is marketed as essential for nerve health, mood, and brain function, and in the correct dose and form, it serves those functions. But pyridoxine is unusual among the B vitamins in one specific way. It is neurotoxic at sustained high doses, not in the way that an acute overdose would be toxic. In a slower, more insidious way, the way a spring loses tension not from a single overload, but from being compressed just slightly too far for too long. The neurological syndrome associated with chronic pyridoxine excess is called sensory neuropathy. In plain language, nerve damage affecting sensation, balance, and, critically, the cognitive processes that depend on intact peripheral neural input. I have documented this in patients who were taking supplement stacks that contained B6 in multiple products simultaneously: a multivitamin, a B complex, and a separate energy supplement, each contributing individually acceptable amounts that, when added together, exceeded the tolerable upper limit every single day for years. They were not aware they were stacking. No one had ever added it up for them. Earlier this year, during a case review with colleagues in Boston, we laid out data on 11 patients presenting with progressive cognitive complaints and peripheral sensory changes. 7 of the 11 had combined daily B6 intakes across all supplements, exceeding 50 milligrams per day. 7. That number should not surprise anyone familiar with the literature. It should, however, surprise anyone who believed that because a supplement is sold without a prescription, its cumulative dose is being tracked by someone. Tonight, I want you to do one thing. Pull out every supplement you are currently taking, every single one. Read the B6 content on each label. Add the numbers together. If the sum exceeds 10 milligrams of pyridoxine per day, the form matters. That is a conversation you need to have with your physician before the end of this week. If you have noticed any numbness, tingling, or balance changes alongside cognitive fog, type yes in the comments. If you have not, type 0. Your answer helps other viewers see they are not alone in this. The fourth mechanism is high-dose vitamin D supplementation without cofactors, and the calcium dysregulation it can trigger in the aging brain. I want to be precise here, because vitamin D is one of the most important nutrients for brain health in older adults, and I do not want this to be misread as an argument against it. The evidence supporting adequate vitamin D levels for cognitive preservation is substantial and consistent. What I am documenting here is a specific pattern: high-dose supplementation, typically 5,000 to 10,000 international units per day, taken without the cofactors that govern where the calcium goes. Vitamin D's primary function in the body is to increase calcium absorption from the gut. In the absence of adequate vitamin K2, specifically the MK7 form, that calcium enters the bloodstream but lacks the routing signal that directs it into bones and out of soft tissues. A well-calibrated system routes calcium precisely. Without K2, the routing signal is missing. The calcium goes where it should not, into arterial walls, into kidney tissue, and, this is the part the literature documents but rarely reaches the patient, into the small vessels of the brain. Cerebrovascular calcification contributes to a pattern of cognitive decline that on clinical presentation resembles vascular dementia. Small vessel disease. The kind of cognitive impairment characterized not by the global memory loss typical of Alzheimer's, but by processing slowness, executive function decline, and word retrieval difficulty. The kind that builds quietly over months and years while the patient continues taking their daily vitamin D, believing they are doing the right thing. Picture yourself at the end of a normal day. The house is quiet, you have taken your supplements, you have been careful about this for years. And yet, over the past several months, you have noticed something you cannot fully name. Not forgetfulness exactly, more like a delay, a moment between the thought and the word. You tell yourself it is fatigue, but the delay is getting longer. And no one has ever connected it to the supplements lined up on your kitchen counter. The correction here is not to stop taking vitamin D. It is to take it in the right context. Adequate K2, at least 100 micrograms of MK7 daily, alongside any vitamin D supplementation above 2000 IU. Magnesium glycinate to support the conversion of D into its active hormonal form, and periodic monitoring. 25-hydroxyvitamin D blood work at least once per year to confirm you are in the therapeutic range, not above it. A 25-OH vitamin D level above 100 nanograms per milliliter, which I have documented in patients taking unmonitored high-dose supplements, carries its own risks. The target is between 40 and 70, not higher. If this has been useful so far, tap the like button. It is the single most important signal that keeps this evidence reaching more seniors. The fifth mechanism is the one that has changed how I practice medicine, and the one I want you to hold on to after this video ends. It is the interaction between these vitamins when they are mismanaged simultaneously, not one vitamin. The pattern that emerges when 2 or 3 of these mechanisms are running concurrently in the same aging body. I want to walk you through a patient I have followed for several years. I will call her Patricia. She was 74 years old when she first came to my office, a retired school teacher from Charlotte, North Carolina. Her daughter had brought her in because Patricia had been experiencing what she described as episodes of confusion, walking into a room and having no recall of why she was there, losing track of conversations mid-sentence, occasionally becoming disoriented in familiar surroundings. Her previous physician had referred her for a cognitive evaluation. The evaluation came back with a finding of mild cognitive impairment, and a conversation had been initiated about Alzheimer's disease. Patricia sat across from me one afternoon and said quietly, "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't believe it was that. I've always been sharp. I ordered a full panel. Not a standard panel, a functional panel. Methylmalonic acid, homocysteine, 25-hydroxyvitamin D, a complete supplement inventory, which her daughter helped reconstruct from every bottle in Patricia's medicine cabinet. What I documented, a methylmalonic acid level elevated well above the reference range, indicating functional B12 deficiency, despite a total B12 reading her previous physician had flagged as normal. A 25-OH vitamin D level of 112 nanograms per milliliter. She had been taking 8,000 IU daily for 2 years on the recommendation of a friend, without K2, without monitoring, and a combined daily folic acid intake from her multivitamin and a separate B complex of 1,600 micrograms, all synthetic folic acid, not methylfolate, in a patient who, we later confirmed through genetic testing, carried the MTHFR variant that significantly impairs conversion. 3 mechanisms, running simultaneously for 2 years in a patient who had been told she might have Alzheimer's disease. I adjusted her supplementation. I switched her to methylcobalamin, the active form of B12, administered initially under supervised protocol. Methylfolate at therapeutic dose in place of folic acid, reduced vitamin D to 3000 IU with adequate K2 and magnesium, and we began monitoring. Within 3 weeks, her daughter called my office. "Doctor," Patricia said when I reached her, "I had a conversation with my entire book club last Tuesday, and I didn't lose my place once. I feel like myself again." 3 weeks. 3. This was not a miracle. Her brain had simply received what it had been lacking and had been cleared of what had been interfering. Small, disciplined adjustments, measurable results. The same kind of outcome is fully available to you. I want to say something that I do not say in every video. The reason Patricia's story matters is not the happy ending. The reason it matters is that she almost didn't get there. She was weeks away from being placed on a medication pathway for a disease she did not have. And the evidence that would have redirected that pathway, the functional lab work, the supplement inventory, the genetic context, was available. It was simply never ordered. Your next visit with a physician will most likely last 15 minutes. There is no version of that conversation that covers what I walked through tonight. That is not a criticism of any individual physician. It is a structural reality. And it is why I am here. Now I will walk you through exactly how to put this into practice starting tonight. First, do not wait for your next scheduled appointment. Call your physician's office tomorrow morning and request a specific set of labs: methylmalonic acid, homocysteine, 25-hydroxyvitamin D, and a complete metabolic panel. If they ask why, tell them you are concerned about functional nutrient status and cognitive health. That language will be understood. Second, pull out every supplement you are currently taking tonight. Everyone. Create a list of the B6 content, folic acid content, and vitamin D content across all products. Add the B6 totals. If they exceed 10 milligrams of pyridoxine per day, reduce immediately. If your multivitamin lists folic acid rather than methylfolate, replace it. If you are taking more than 2000 IU of vitamin D without K2 and magnesium, add those cofactors tonight. Third, if you are experiencing cognitive symptoms, fog, word-finding difficulty, disorientation, ask specifically for the functional markers, not the standard panel. The standard panel will often miss what matters. The functional markers will not. Within 3 to 7 days of correcting the folic acid issue, many patients report improved mental clarity, not dramatic, but perceptible, a reduction in the fog. Within 2 to 3 weeks, if B12 was the primary driver, the myelin begins to benefit from corrected substrate availability. Within 4 to 6 weeks, if vitamin D and K2 co-administration is properly adjusted, calcium routing begins to normalize. Within 3 months, your physician will likely see measurable changes in cognitive function metrics, if they are looking for them. Treat this as non-negotiable, no different from taking a prescribed medication. The brain does not compensate indefinitely. The window for correction is real, and it is open tonight. If what you've heard tonight has been of value to you, share this video with someone over 60 whom you love, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, a close friend. One share might begin a conversation that quietly redirects a trajectory that was heading in the wrong direction. Let us bring all of this together. Tonight, we walked through 5 mechanisms by which vitamin mismanagement, not aging itself, can produce cognitive decline that mimics, accelerates, or compounds the very conditions it was supposed to prevent. Functional B12 deficiency hidden by standard testing, synthetic folic acid accumulation blocking the receptors it was supposed to activate, B6 toxicity building silently across stacked supplements, high-dose vitamin D without cofactors disrupting calcium routing in the small vessels of the brain, and the compounding pattern that emerges when 2 or 3 of these run simultaneously in the same aging body for months or years. Each of these carries its own weight in the medical literature. But what the pattern I have documented across 15 years of clinical practice consistently shows is this: when they layer together, the cognitive impact is not additive. It is multiplicative. And the correction, when it comes with the right guidance, can be equally striking. Now I would like to turn the question toward you. Which of these 5 mechanisms had you been told was simply normal aging? There is someone in your life, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, a close friend, who is over 60, who is taking vitamins every day because they believe they are doing everything right, and who has been experiencing cognitive changes they cannot fully explain. Send this to them. That one action may be the most important thing you do this week. One final note. Everything I have shared tonight is general medical information, grounded in published research and years of clinical experience. Every person's situation is unique. Before making changes, particularly if you are currently on medication, have a full, honest conversation with your own physician. That is not a legal disclaimer. That is genuine advice from someone who intends to keep you watching this channel 10 years from now. You are not broken. What is broken is the information you have been given. This is not aging itself. This is something specific, documentable, and correctable. Your body is ready to respond. It simply needs the correct inputs, starting tonight. Take care of yourself, starting tonight.